All right, well, let's do it. I know we've got a lot to cover. We already got a bunch of great questions ahead of time, and we want to keep this under an hour. So
This might be the most questions we've ever received.
Yeah, hot topic. Very good. And so this is being recorded. We will share the recording in a couple days. Takes a little bit of time to get it downloaded and prepped and ready to send out. So Natalie does so much work in prepping these presentations and gets the slides all beautiful, and then she gets them all ready to send out afterwards. So we'll get that out. As always, anything that's being recorded, right? Some of this stuff is time sensitive. So if you are listening to the recording in a future date, just kind of keep that in mind. But let's, without further ado, so thanks everybody for joining us today, and welcome to session number 3 of our annual monthly workshop series. My name is Jason Dahl. If you didn't already know, I am a certified financial planner and a partner at AFS Financial Group. With me is my colleague Alp Adebeck, the founder and managing partner at AFS. And I know we have several people tuning in from what we call the 401k side of the AFS family. So just as a quick reminder, we at AFS Financial Group, we do operate as a separate entity from AFS 401k Retirement Services, but we often collaborate, especially when it comes to our financial wellness programs. So welcome to everyone. And today, of course, we will be discussing long-term care, everything you need to know. All right, I'm going to emphasize on the need to know, because there is a lot of information that we are going to cover, but there's a whole lot of information that we could cover, right, related to long-term care. But really our goal today is to make sure we cover the essentials, right? And we recognize that we may create more questions than we answer in some instances. And so kind of to that point, please ask questions at any time during today's session. You can ask a question by typing it into the Q&A link on your screen. There should be a little dialog box that will open up if you click the Q&A link. We are going to keep everyone muted. It just seems to work better that way. But please type in a question at any point. Certainly one of our favorite questions is, can I schedule a time to connect with you, Jason and Alp? And we would definitely encourage you to do that. So you could directly follow up with us after the webinar. If you have further questions directly related to things that we covered today, or would like to, discuss any other topic, we'll be happy to schedule a time to review things over a Zoom call, traditional phone call, and we are doing some stuff in person again in the office in Bethesda. So we would
imagine that.
Imagine that.
The world is normalizing.
Yeah, very good. Yep. And so we love what we do. And the best part of what we do is connecting with people and helping you solve personal financial planning puzzles. So please don't hesitate to reach out. All right, so on to today's agenda. All right, we're going to first sort of lay the groundwork of kind of what is long-term care, right? What kind of goes into long-term care. Really emphasizing why planning is important, right? And there's a lot of different ways you can go about planning for the possibility of needing long-term care. Definitely going to cover sort of the government options or government programs of Medicare and Medicaid. This presentation is not a Medicare and Medicaid presentation. We're going to purely keep it in the context of long-term care for today's purposes. And then certainly spend some time on private long-term care options, right? Or what we would call long-term care insurance, right? We often use the acronym LTCi when I'm talking about long-term care insurance. And then just as a quick primer there, that is coverage that provides nursing home care, home health care, personal or adult daycare for individuals who may be suffering from a chronic or disabling condition that needs ongoing supervision. All right, we're going to build on this some more, but LTCi offers more flexibility and options than public assistance programs such as Medicare and Medicaid. And in today's workshop, we will dive into what long-term care insurance is, why you should consider obtaining coverage when it might be the right component to add to your plan. Certainly, we'll talk about the different types of long-term care insurance and how to financially optimize coverage along with other subjects. And I think Alp and I are going to kind of repeat this theme a few times today, but just recognizing that, again, we want to provide kind of the essentials and the concepts related to a lot of these topics, but recognizing, right, we're not going to be able to give, personal advice, run personal quotes in this next hour, right? But that's what's follow up, right? We can definitely dive into more detail on a personal level in the follow up. So I just also want to make a quick note that long-term care insurance is often confused with long-term disability insurance. We get that kind of often that question frequently. And so we're not covering long-term disability insurance today, which is, coverage that's most frequently obtained during your working years, right? A totally different sort of purpose and type of coverage, where here we're talking about long-term care insurance, right? Which is most often obtained, I'll say, near retirement age or later. All right.
And Jason, thank you for that introduction. Yeah. And I'll say for everyone, this is Jason's show today. I'm primarily taking the role of Vanna White, so I will ask questions every once in a while to Jason, but he will lead the show today.
I think the Vanna White reference is still relevant, right? She's still. All right. So just kind of I always like to kind of lay out, high level, risk management, right? Which is kind of part of the purpose of insurance, right? And whoops, there we go, to kind of to manage risk. And there's really, right, kind of the objective of risk management, right, is to sort of choose efficiently among different methods of handling a risk, right? So as to avoid a catastrophic loss, and not to get sort of too wonky here, right? But I think this is helpful in sort of laying the groundwork when it comes to having a plan for the potential need of long-term care, right? And so the sort of the four primary ways of addressing risk, right, or managing risk, is through kind of avoiding the risk, right? So think of it as kind of trying not to engage in risky activity. Now, admittedly, the risk of needing long-term care is difficult to avoid. Sometimes it's just unavoidable. Reducing our exposure to a risk, right? Like reducing risk through safety, or more relevant to this presentation, through health improvements, right? So trying to live a healthier life may not always, but it may help reduce the chance of needing long-term care. And then, of course, you can transfer that risk, right, through the use of insurance, which we're obviously going to dive into, or you can retain the risk, right? And there's different ways of retaining the risk, right? Oftentimes people use the term kind of self-insurance, right? Just basically saying, hey, if I need it, I'm taking on that risk myself. I'll pay for it out of pocket. Or there are other potential ways of kind of retaining that risk, right? It could be a combination of transferring and retention, right, through the use of deductibles and such. And we'll dive more into those subjects. Now, I do want to sort of just add something else that we've run into. Right. Well, one, risk sort of transfer, right, through insurance really needs to be justified based on a cost-benefit analysis, right? And it's not a perfect science, right, because you're kind of trying to predict the future, which can be difficult to predict. But it's basically, right, thinking about a known cost, right, through the cost of a premium. Hey, you know what this cost is. Is it worth the trade-off, right, to protect against a potentially high and kind of unpredictable sort of future cost, potentially catastrophic cost, right? And so that's kind of the analysis that you're trying to do. And I will also add to that, and I kind of know this firsthand, how an individual's kind of personality or your experience can also influence an insurance decision. I know for me in my household growing up, my father, I only ever heard him make one comment whenever he talked about insurance, and that was that insurance companies only insure that they make money, right? So they give you a sense of sort of his attitude or preconceived notions, right? So needless to say, right, that he had a negative bias towards insurance. However, our family also had direct experience with my mother's father needing care, a long-term care, right? Ultimately needing it in a nursing home. And we really learned firsthand, wow, the many challenges that go into acquiring that care, paying for that care, getting that care provided, right? And so I think that helped loosen my dad's perspective on it a little bit, to the point to where my parents actually now have long-term care insurance, which my dad probably would have never gotten it had he not had that firsthand experience.
And I'd always look at, I'll say, homeowners insurance similar to long-term care insurance. You hope you never need it, right? We all pay for homeowners insurance. Big difference, the obvious, homeowners insurance is a lot cheaper than long-term care insurance, but nobody goes without it, or I've never met anybody that goes without it. And as you know, if you've got a mortgage on your house, you're forced to have it, but you don't want to use either of the policies. You'd prefer not to.
Yeah, I think it's a good analogy. So again, just kind of, some high level best practices that kind of apply to all insurances, right? To kind of review your coverages and your potential risk exposures at least once a year, right? And I know that's something that we try to do. Right. And part of that reviewing is, where are some potential risks or weaknesses in the coverage, right? And then that cost benefit analysis of thinking about, okay, should I transfer this risk? Should I retain it? Should I, blend some risk retention, as well as transferring it through the use of an insurance policy? All right, and I already kind of commented about this, but really the best advice I think that Alp and I and our team at AFS can provide is to make sure you have a plan, right? And there are various ways to plan for a potential long-term care event. And a part of that plan may or may not include insurance, right? This isn't meant to be a sales pitch that everybody needs to have long-term care insurance, right? It's meant to sort of educate and empower folks to think about, all right, I should have a plan, right? And we're going to talk about the many different components that go into that. Right. And it's sort of posing some questions that we all sort of need to ask ourselves, right? Kind of thinking about like, all right, well, who or what is going to pay for long-term care services if I need it, right? The unfortunate reality is in this country, most care is actually paid for, right, or provided just kind of out of the blood, sweat, and tears of a loved one, right? And just somebody just literally physically providing that care. Otherwise, that care is paid for, right, through the transfer or shifting of income, right? Saying, all right, we've got to take income that was paying for something else, and now we need to use it to pay for care, right? Or through liquidating of assets, right? And which could be any number of types of assets, right? To sort of pay for care, right? And sort of spending down those assets. Medicaid, we'll talk about in a minute, and sort of how that potentially could fit into the equation as well. I know I'll never forget a conversation I had with a female client who was sharing her experience that she had provided care for her husband, right? She was that front line providing care for her husband who had dementia. And she commented that she didn't feel like as much that he lost his life in the experience, but rather she sort of lost hers, right? Like so much of her daily life just became being a caregiver, right? And in some respects, like he was actually physically in good shape, right? And every day she said, well, gosh, every day was like literally a brand new day to him. But for her, it was just over and over. And she really became exhausted and ill herself from all of that care, right? And so that's the thing that by having a plan, we want to avoid, right? Like we don't want anybody to sort of be quote unquote kind of stuck in that position, right? And I'm sure all of us share that we don't ever want to be that burden on someone, right? So that's again kind of that recurring theme today about a plan. All right, so here these are some of those sort of key questions to kind of ponder and think about, right? Like, do you feel you're going to live a long life, or is it possible, right, that you will live a long life? Right? For most of us, the answer is a yes, that's possible, right? Or likely. Do you agree that the longer you live, the greater the likelihood your health could become compromised or deteriorate in some form, resulting in you needing extended cares or long-term care? We kind of use those terms interchangeably, extended care, long-term care. And if you ended up needing that care, how or would it impact your loved ones, right? To my earlier point. All right, now, simple graph here just to kind of emphasize that first question on the previous slide, right? Hey, the reality is people are living longer. It's kind of interesting looking at it, going back to the Roman Empire, Middle Ages. Sort of fascinating. But just the main point to take away is, yeah, especially folks, I'll say in more urban areas of means, that the life expectancy is actually higher than sort of the national average. So that to me, that sort of answers that first question. Yes, right. That there is a possibility we're all going to live a long life, and that we may need care, because the reality is our health we slow down, and our health tends to deteriorate, right, as we live longer. This is kind of sobering, I suppose. That 1 in 5 Americans actually do assist someone through caregiving, and 9 out of 10 of those of caregivers receive very little or no financial support for that, right? And it's not necessarily, right, it's out of ill will, right? It's just that there wasn't a plan in place, and there aren't assets or income that's available to care to pay for that care. And just sort of a statement of fact here. What we read about and we see statistically speaking is that it disproportionately affects the oldest daughter, right? That's what we often see, that caregiver ends up being the eldest daughter, right? Depending on sort of the family makeup, which is interesting. Also not, I guess, shocking if you kind of think about it, but. And
Jason, I'll say also those that live closest in proximity.
Yeah, absolutely.
To the parents, where those that move out of town generally are kind of excused from that responsibility, other than the guilt part of it. Sure.
All right, so I think it's really important to understand the distinction around what is long-term care, and a really important point to always remember is long-term care is not healthcare, and healthcare is not long-term care, right? And the same applies when you think about the insurance, right? Long-term care insurance is not health insurance. Health insurance is not long-term care insurance, and they don't, right, that one does not support the other. They are distinct from one another, right? So I think this slide does a nice job of sort of framing it as to, okay, long-term care really is about sort of that ongoing maintenance types of care, right? Having someone help you with activities of daily living, assisted living, custodial care, another term that's often used, just care, help around the home, right? Or adult daycare, and it also does include nursing home care, right? And so, but it's not exclusively nursing home care. That's often a misconception too, that we see, that it's that folks think long-term care is just in a nursing home. No, and it's actually most often in-home care, in your own home, and sort of that distinction, sort of that skilled care component of it, right? Like think doctors and nurses, right? Doctors and nurses is healthcare, right? Whereas sort of that maintenance, custodial care services is really about long-term care, and we'll elaborate a little bit on that more when we talk Medicare and sort of how that plays into it. All right, some more sort of sobering numbers here, and Alp made the comment earlier about how long-term care insurance is not cheap, and that's a directly correlated to, because the care is not cheap, right? And here's just a tool. Genworth is just one carrier. We're not promoting them. A couple other carriers do these annual surveys as well, but they're very helpful, right? They just on an annual basis sort of provide regional average costs or median costs, and you can drill down, down to the city level in certain instances, or regionally in states and so forth. And it's important to recognize that the cost of care can vary widely across the country, right? It's typically going to be lower cost and more kind of lower cost living areas, right? More rural areas, and it could be higher than these numbers in higher costs, right? If you're in San Francisco or LA or New York City, right? So perhaps stating the obvious there, but again, I think recognizing that, okay, it's not just nursing home care, right? You've got in-home care, right? Sort of homemaker services, home health aid, right? Again, that's to that helping with the activities of daily living. And that's actually sort of a criteria of insurance policies that we'll talk about a little bit more, but I'll just sort of point that out. Like, I always think it's helpful to sort of think of the first 5 things kind of that we all do when we first wake up. Those are kind of the activities of daily living. Like, can you get yourself, in and out of bed? Can you dress yourself, right? Can you bathe yourself? Maintain continence? Can you feed yourself, right? Like those are the kind of activities of daily living. Do you need help with those activities of daily living? That's what kind of homemaker services, home health aid kind of plays into it. Then you've got sort of community-based, right, where somebody might be living at home, but then during the day, right, they go to adult daycare, or are in kind of a continuing care assisted living sort of setting where, hey, I'm independent living, but I also have some support care for part of the day, or that sort of thing. And then of course nursing homes, right, and that can vary as to cost greatly, and on certainly the type or quality of the nursing home, and that whether it's a private or shared semi-private.
Yeah, and I can attest on the nursing home part. My father's last 3 years of his life was in the memory care unit at Riderwood in Silver Spring, and he passed, I believe, in 2013. But the cost was $10,000 a month back then, and so for the last 3 years of his life, basically, was $350,000 to $380,000 that was spent. And again, that was back then. The cost has gone up. He had a private room, but I would tell you it was probably a dorm room out of the 1960s, like a college. It was literally just tile floor, had his own private bathroom, but a very small room. And it just was shocking how much that cost.
Yeah. Right. And again, at the risk of sort of repeating myself here, right, like that cost that Alp was describing was just for the long-term care, right, component of it. He had other healthcare needs, right, and his Medicare and private health insurance, we're covering those. But I think it's really important to understand, like, hey, this is a potentially an added layer, right, of care and cost beyond somebody's healthcare needs.
All the medical bills were always paid for. If he got hospitalized during that period, all that was always paid for through Medicare.
All right. So this, again, I don't think we need to necessarily dive into the charts per se, but again, sort of breaking it down in all 3 areas, right? Whether it's in-home care, assisted living care, nursing home care, the cost has continued to rise. And on average, I'll say it's typically just year after year, if you take a longer term average, it goes up higher than the average sort of rate of, general rate of inflation, right? It's healthcare, long-term care expenses are like, higher education expenses. I feel like they just, without exception, are going up 5%, 6%, 7% a year. And that's the kind of the experience we've seen historically. And I think, it tells us, well, we should probably expect that going forward, barring some, radical changes in our country and how we provide care. All right. So here's just sort of, projecting it forward. All right. So if we just inflated it at 5%, all right, sort of what that additional cost of care would look like 15 years from now. All right, so I'll just sort of put it in context, right? I'll say, again, these are average broad strokes, right? The average person typically ends up needing some form of care around age 80. Okay, so if you're around age 65, you can sort of say, oh, this 15-year window can sort of say, oh, here's what the future annual costs could potentially look like, sort of at this 5% increase. And then this next slide, here we go. Now it's just did the simple math for you. Some of you probably already did it in your head, but just, if you needed 3 years of care at these different levels. And again, the national average when someone needs care, whether it be in-home, assisted living, or nursing home, some form of care, that the average is about 3.2 years, right? So a hair over 3 years as someone ends up needing some form of care. And so that's why we're sort of using these figures, recognizing that, hey, some people need more than 3 years, some need less, some never need the care, right? All right, so let's go on here, right? So again, back to that recurring themes, right? So questions to think about. Do you have a plan? Okay. Do you know how you would fund a plan, right? Critical component to it. And I think the third piece is your family aware of your plan, right? If that's sort of a part of the equation, which I think, if you have family and kind of family, you're engaged with your family at some level, I think it's really important to have make sure your family is aware of what the components of your plan. Hey, you know what? If I deteriorate and need some kind of care in home, assisted living, nursing home, here's sort of the plan that we've sketched out, right? Does it include an insurance policy? Does it include, other components, renovating the house, right? There are a lot of different ways to slice it. And I also think it's a great way that's always sort of hit home to me was, if I ever needed care, or when I think about my parents, if they ever needed care, I know for them, like, they don't want their family to provide that care, right? Kind of back to that. They don't want to be a burden on my sister or me, right? And I certainly don't ever want to be a burden on my kids or my family, but I want to be engaged, right? I don't want to be an absent party to it, right? I want to be able to manage the care being given, right? And so to make sure that they are being taken care of, but I don't want to be the one or be dependent on a loved one providing that care, right? So I just double checking my notes because there's so many different things that we cover here. All right, so let's move into some of the more meaty components here of it, or the tofu portion, for all you vegetarians out there. This is, as I said earlier, we're not going to get into the depths of Medicare and Medicaid, right? That is a whole nother beast to talk about, but I think it's really important. A couple really key points when thinking about Medicare and Medicaid in the context of long-term care. One, these two, Medicare and Medicaid, get confused so frequently, right? We hear it all the time where folks just don't quite understand, they're two different programs, that Medicare, and forgive me if everyone already knows this, but just to make it totally clear, Medicare, right, is health insurance for retirees, right? Age 65, you're eligible for Medicare, and it is by far the most common form of health insurance for retirees or folks over the age of 65 in this country, right? So most all of us either are already or will someday be on Medicare, okay? And just, again, think of that as your primary sort of source of health insurance in retirement. Medicaid, while also kind of a government program, Medicaid is a little bit more of a federal and state kind of program. And I'm at the risk of sort of oversimplifying it here. Think about Medicaid is really for folks with very low income or very low assets. Okay, I mean to the point where, hey, if somebody's qualifying for Medicaid, you typically have assets, in your name, $5,000 or below, something in that kind of low.
So it's fair to say you don't really want to be on Medicaid.
Yeah, right.
For our client base, right?
I think that's fair to say, and there are other reasons to, depending on what state you're in, that you might may not want to be on Medicaid, but and I know that Medicaid can be a charged kind of issue in some circles, but I just kind of want to point that out, that
Sure.
It shouldn't be a part of your plan. That's the key piece of it, right? When it comes to your long-term care plan, Medicaid really should not be a part of it. I realize there are, websites and advisors that sort of talk about, hey, how can I plan for and potentially get myself or a loved one, move my assets or use like an annuity to sort of shelter or hide assets to then get on Medicaid, right? To be eligible for those public benefits. Very complicated, very difficult to do. Sorry,
I'll say, and it can be done, right? You don't see it done when people have a lot of assets. You see it done at times when, I'll say, there's $400,000 or $500,000 of assets, and the family's saying, you know what? If we actually transfer these in a timely manner, there's look-back periods, and it varies by state, but typically 5 years, that they'll try to empty the person's assets.
Yeah.
to allow them to qualify for Medicaid down the road in the event that they need it. And then in theory, the $500,000 in the example I gave is protected for the family.
Yeah, and I just jumped ahead. I'll go back. Don't worry. I just jumped ahead since we sort of dove right into the Medicaid component of it here, right? But just, yeah, and I'm going to point out those bottom two bullet points, right? Alp talked about it. Hey, a lot of states have a 5-year look back. So even if you did transfer assets, if those transfers happened within 5 years, the state can say, nope, those don't qualify. And many states have kind of, I'll say, wised up, if you will, to say, all right, that's great. You successfully sort of sheltered assets. But after someone passes away, a lot of states now have on the book the ability to say, all right, if there's assets in their estate, even though it was sheltered, we can kind of claw those back potentially. But again, this presentation is not meant to be to dive into there. So the other really important, I think, piece when it comes to Medicare, and hopefully this is you're already sort of getting this, is like, oh, Jason has really emphasized that, right? Health insurance is not long-term care insurance, right? And vice versa. And Medicare is health insurance. Okay, it is not long-term care insurance. So the easiest thing, the most important takeaway when it comes to long-term care or planning for long-term care, just ignore Medicare. Medicare is just not a part of the equation. All right, that's really the simplest way to think about it. Now, some folks may say, well, but I'm and Alpin, you could probably elaborate here. I think in your dad's case, right, where he actually, Medicare was paying for a period of time of sort of care, like more like rehabilitation type care, right? And rehabilitation is considered health care, right? And so Medicare will pay for up to basically 100 days of rehabilitation care, all right? But the distinction is, as soon as the doctor says, you know what, this patient is no longer expected to recover, right? This isn't about rehabilitation any longer. It's now just about custodial maintenance care. The health insurance piece of it, Medicare stops, right? I mean, is that fair to say, kind of what your experience out?
Yeah, so I would say, in my father's situation, there was a period he was in the hospital, and then he came back to riderhood and going through some rehab, and they were monitoring it. I think around day 18, 19, the doctor made the decision, he's not getting better. The rehab's not going to matter. And basically was, back to us paying for it. Government picked up the tab for a little bit of time, and that was it.
Yeah, so it's important to talk about Medicare and Medicaid in the context of long-term care because it gets talked about a lot. But I guess the biggest takeaway really is it's probably neither of those programs are going to be a part of most people's plans, right? I mean, Medicare just period for anybody, and Medicaid for very, very sort of small slice of folks. All right, so let's kind of transition to the potential, the transferring of risk kind of component of the conversation, right, through private long-term care options. Right. So specifically long-term care insurance, right, or LTCi as we often use the acronym for, right? So just to reiterate a little bit. So at its basic level, right, the concept of long-term care insurance is about purchasing access to a pool of money, right? So and like pretty much all insurance, it's about leveraging, right? Like saying, hey, for a known sort of lower cost via a premium, I'm leveraging that money for a larger pool of money that could be used if I need it, right? Just back to Alp's, homeowners insurance policy, right? A low, monthly or annual or semi-annual sort of homeowners insurance policy. You hope you never need it, but if you do need it, it provides you, leverage or access to a larger pool of money. Same idea here. Right. So, but long-term care insurance, and we're going to get into this, so there's a lot of different ways to slice and dice and customize that pool of benefits, right? To use the old, right, the car analogy, right? You can buy the Fiat version, right, or the Chrysler version, or the Porsche version, or the Lamborghini version, whatever, and anything in between, and also
and it's priced accordingly, right?
And priced accordingly. Yep. And then and want to make clear, right? We've been talking about the different forms of care, right? In-home, assisted living, and nursing home. All of the insurance solutions or options that we're describing will pay benefits for any form of care that we've talked about. Care in home, in an assisted living setting, or in a nursing home. Okay, just want to.
Jason, I think all the modern policies are like that. So obviously, anybody listening is going to be getting a modern policy. Some of the older policies
that's true.
Didn't really address that, but I don't know if they've ever amended any of those, but they may not have covered home care.
That's a great point. Yeah, there are some older, as in like policies from 20 plus years ago that were, then they say it right in the policy coverage that it was only for nursing home, right? Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Al.
Which is a distinction, right? Because if somebody wanted people coming into their home, they wanted to stay there, their home was set up for care, very easy to do. You're kind of forced in that example if you want to tap into the policy to, go to a nursing home facility.
Yeah. All right. So what are the kind of the components of a long-term care insurance policy? And then also, sort of talking at the same time, right, the components that go into the cost of a policy, right? So you can kind of enhance, all right, or dial up or dial down any of these kind of benefit components, right? So there's the benefit amount. Most frequently that's referenced in a monthly benefit amount, right? So, I've got a policy that, day one, when I purchase the policy, provides, up to $5,000 a month of coverage, $8,000 a month, $10,000 a month, right? $20,000 a month, right? You can dream it, you can probably kind of create it. Then there's what's called the benefit period, okay, which is to say, like, okay, for how many months is this policy designed to cover, right? So if it's $5,000 a month benefit amount, a lot of policies, remember I talked about sort of on average folks need care for about 3 years. So we most often see benefit periods of 3 years or 36 months, okay? Then you have the inflation protection piece, right? Going back to remember that 15-year example of projecting the cost? Well, if you get a policy today that's a meaningful benefit amount when you're 65, well, the odds of needing the care, needing the policy don't really exist for another 15 years, right? Typically. So you need to inflate that benefit amount, right? Have it go up at an inflation rate. An elimination period. Okay, think of that as kind of like a deductible. You can have no elimination period. You could have a 30-day elimination period, 60, 90, 180, 360. Most elimination periods are 90 days, right? And we can
the shorter ones will cost more. So
exactly.
If you have a 30-day elimination period, your premiums will be higher.
That's exactly right. Yep.
And Jason, if you could, on the benefit period, what if somebody has a $7,000 monthly benefit, but is only using $3,000 of it in the beginning?
Yeah. So that's very good. So let's kind of talk about how this sort of plays out in practice. And then we've got a couple examples to hopefully help illustrate this here in a moment, right? So, all right. So you what was your example? $7,000 a month?
$7,000 a month.
All right. And let's say they have a 36-month benefit period, right? So just make sure my math is right. So that'd be $252,000 of an initial benefit pool, right? Okay, so Alp's example, initial benefit amount, $7,000 a month. The benefit period is 36 months. So you have a pool of assets to access, right? In this example of day one, $252,000, okay? Important to note, right, that inflation protection. So if you got a policy that has a 3% inflation protection, think of both that $7,000 a month. So every year that $7,000 a month will go up by 3%. Most policies are compound inflation, but not all. Some are simple inflation protection, right? So that's an important distinction to look for. But if that 7,000 is inflating, well, by extension, the benefit pool is inflating, right? Because instead of 7,000 times 36 months, it's 7,000 plus 3% times 36 months, right? So every year, it's a higher monthly amount times that benefit period. Okay, but just saying on day one, you got a policy, 36-month, 3-year benefit period, $7,000 a month benefit amount. And let's just, for simplicity, say it had a 0-day elimination period, right? So and then, immediately after getting the policy in force, something happens where you end up needing care, okay? But let's say, so one way to think about it is if that care immediately it costs $7,000 a month, right? If it's exactly the amount of your benefit, right? Because you've got, you're in a semi-private room in a nursing home, right? Or home care, where it's exactly, I realize this is an unrealistic example. It's never exactly, right? But just to illustrate the point, if it were exactly the costs were exactly $7,000 a month, well, that policy will last you exactly 36 months, right? Because it's going to go over that benefit period. But to Alp's question, well, what if I only need care in home for a few hours a day? Right, I just need someone to come in to kind of help me prepare some meals, bathe, right, and then I'm good, right, for the rest of the day. So the cost is only $4,000 a month or $5,000 a month. In that example, if it stayed level, right, the cost was only $5,000 a month. Well, then your pool of money is actually going to last longer than 36 months. Right. So hopefully that makes sense, right? Because it really is about that benefit pool. And so the benefit amount is like a maximum amount that the insurance policy will reimburse you on a monthly basis. But if you're getting reimbursed for a lower amount, well, then that benefit pool will last longer than the initial benefit period.
And one of our recommendations is, once you qualify for the benefits, even if it's just a de minimis amount, based on what Jason just said, you actually start collecting the benefits, because it doesn't matter that you're not collecting the full amount.
Yep. Yeah, that is most oftentimes our advice. It's not, across the board, but that typically is. Yep. We already talked about the activities of daily living. We've talked about Medicare and Medicaid, traditional versus hybrid policies. So we're going to get into that here in just a moment. All right. So a couple other things to keep in mind: that all qualified long-term care insurance plans, the benefits paid come out tax-free. Okay, it's very rare that there are some older policies that were written in a way that aren't what are considered qualified plans. So that the benefits could come out and be taxable to you. Very rare, almost never see that. Today, any new policies that we ever look at are all qualified plans. So just important to remember that. Like, oh, right. So if it's paying me, or reimbursing me $7,000 a month, I'm not paying taxes, right, on the benefits received. And then to qualify for benefits, every policy that we work with has the same sort of qualifying factors, right? That you are unable to perform 2 out of the 6 activities of daily living that we talked about. Okay, so if you need assistance with any 2 of the 6, then the benefits, you qualify for the benefits. Or if you suffer from a cognitive impairment, right? So think of dementia, Alzheimer's, the most sort of common examples there. Okay. All right. Now, so some of the different ways of getting policies, and I know we got several questions ahead of time in this area. All right, so the standalone long-term care insurance, which I often refer to as sort of the traditional form, which is basically you pay a premium every year, okay, to have coverage, right? And this is just a pure play long-term care insurance policy. Right. And I emphasize that sort of pure play because the other options that we're talking about are various forms of sort of hybrid components where there's something going on more than just the long-term care insurance. Okay. So this is typically going to provide the highest amount of leverage, right? So for the relatively speaking, the amount of premium paid is going to provide the highest benefit pool, right, that we've been talking about relative to the other kinds of policy options. The drawbacks are couple things really stand out as the potential drawbacks. The premiums are not set in stone. So any of you who have a policy or know someone that's had a traditional policy, those premiums can and will go up at some point in the future. And in recent years, we've seen some pretty significant policy premium increases. Now, the insurance company cannot cherry pick you and your particular policy, right? They can't come back and say, oh, has your health deteriorated to a point where now we're going to increase your premium? That's not how it works. It's basically the insurance company has to appeal to the state in which you got your policy, that state's insurance commission, to say, hey, to keep all these policies kind of valid, right, or solvent in some respects, we need to raise the premiums. The insurance commission will review it, and oftentimes will come back and say, you know what, okay, we agree, you need to increase them, but not at the quite the level that you proposed raising it, right? So those details are for another conversation. But the important thing to realize is if you get a traditional sort of annual pay premium, you should budget for that. Hey, that premium will go up at some point in the future.
And to kind of touch on the subject a little bit, I'll say we have seen some that have applied for 50, 60, 70% premium increases. Again, they have to get approval for it, but we've seen some major changes. Some companies have done very little premium increases or none, but I'll say the bigger policies, the bigger carriers out there, I think mispriced this originally, and we've seen fairly substantial increases.
Yep. All right, for the sake of time, I am definitely we're going to dive into these other three areas, but since we're talking about the standalone, let's get into sort of the examples here, so it's clear, right? So the traditional pay, you pay that annual premium, provides a daily or monthly benefit, right? We've been talking about the $7,000 a month, but sometimes they'll reference it as a daily level, right? That benefit period could be 2, 3, 4, 5-year benefit period. Those are kind of the most common. There are longer ones. The inflation options we talked about, right? You can see anywhere from 0 inflation protection to 5%, right? We almost never recommend a 0 inflation kind of policy. The elimination period we already talked about, and then it's important, right, to think about the carrier, right, who's making the offer to you, and look at their recent history for rate increases, right? That is definitely something that we consider when we're looking at different policy options. Again, just a conceptual example. This is not meant to be an example for you as an individual, right? It's super important that if you think, hey, I want to find out more for my own situation, you need to really get a personalized quote, okay? Because there's so many variables that go into it. Your own health situation, your age, the state in which you live, and so on. So this is just to really provide make sure everyone sort of understands it conceptually. All right. Again, we talked about the $5,000 a month, or it could be referenced in a daily benefit amount, coverage for 3 years, right? I already walked through that. You just basically multiply the two numbers together to get that benefit pool. We talked about the inflation coverage, the elimination period. Most typical example we see is 90 days, right? So I think we've already kind of touched on all of those enough. I'll
throw on when you look at the benefit dollars, I'll just say, you can look at some of this as a partial hedge. So even though we throw numbers out there that say, you know what, it could cost you $10,000 a month or more, some people just want to have some coverage in place to offset some of it. Yep.
Yeah. I think that, Alp's heard me say this a lot, right? When talking to clients and, considering a plan, and insurance is a part of that plan, it's, look at a policy coverage level that's meaningful, right? That's the term I always think about, right? It's like, okay, if I don't want to afford or can't afford, right, sort of the full Monty, $10,000 a month benefit, and the cost of a policy that would provide that, okay, maybe I'm going to get a $5,000 a month benefit. So that way, all right, if I needed care, I know that I don't have to pay for it all out of pocket or through my assets, right? That hey, I'm hedging that risk, and that's what we most often see. All right, so I think a great transition comment between the traditional pay and the linked benefit or hybrid policies is one of the other drawbacks for the traditional policies. I talked about the premiums could increase. One of the other drawbacks is hey, if you never need the policy, that's just premium that you've paid, right? You've had that protection in place while you were paying it. But if you pass away having never needed the policy, or if at some point in the future, for some reason, we rarely see this, but on occasion, somebody might say, I don't want the policy anymore, I want to cancel it. Well, all the premiums that you've paid up until that point are just, lost, if you will, right? But yeah, I mean, you had the protection in place while you paid it, but there's no, benefit at the end, right? If you never needed the long-term care insurance. So kind of as a response, the insurance industry sort of came out with these policies to really kind of address those two big issues of the rising premiums, and once you've got a policy in place, and the sort of lost premium if you never needed the care. So with these kinds of policies, these are most often paid with a single premium. Okay, so you put in a lump sum initially, and the policy is paid up. Thus, they can't raise the premium on you in the future, right? So that kind of addresses that issue. And they typically will have some form of a return of premium option, right? So if you did cancel it, they'll return. Some policies, it's 100% of what you paid, no interest or anything. But more often we're seeing maybe they'll give you 80% back, right? So there's at least something that if you canceled it, you could get some money back. But that's very rare. We don't see that very often. But if someone does pass away without ever needing their policy, I had my grandmother had a linked benefit policy. I'll say fortunately she never needed the long-term care. She was healthy right up to the end, but when she passed away, it ended up paying a death benefit to her two children, right? And so that's sort of to address the other issue of hey, somebody's going to get something out of this policy. Okay. It typically does not have as much leverage as the pure play long-term care insurance policy, right? Because you're now kind of paying for these other benefits, right? But again, it comes down to that sort of cost benefit analysis. Like, do you have the liquid assets to put in $50, $75, $100,000, right, to get a sort of meaningful coverage level, right?
And all these, again, subject to underwriting.
Yes, we've only sort of skirted around the underwriting component so far. So thank you, Hop. So again, just to sort of illustrate, conceptualize how these hybrid policies, linked benefit policies work. All right, just an example of, hey, I'm going to shift $100,000 of my liquid assets into a policy. That policy is now paid up. In this case, it provides, and I now have a benefit pool of $500,000 in this example. Again, please don't take this as, hey, when I ran a quote, I didn't get that same number that Jason put there. Right? This is just, this is not meant to be an example for you specifically. But and then sort of all the other things apply the same way, right? You qualify for the benefit based on the activities of daily living, right? Based on a cognitive impairment. Then they'll pay out a monthly maximum benefit, right? And if you need the care, and let's just say, you needed care and it paid benefit, but it only paid $50,000 of benefit and then you passed away, well, there will still be a residual death benefit in this example of $50,000, right? So it just sort of reduces dollar for dollar in that case. Once you've used up at least $100,000 of long-term care benefit, there's no more life insurance component to it, with a few exceptions. Sometimes the policies pay a residual, just a couple $1,000s in those examples. But
and I'll say, when you look at these type of examples, this is a great example of a hedge where let's say this is the $5,000 per month benefit, so that's $60,000. So it's basically an 8+ year benefit period, which is a longer benefit period. So if somebody, wanted to have a longer or a higher or more robust monthly benefit, essentially you would have a lower total benefit. So if you had $10,000 per month benefit, you wouldn't get the same type of leverage.
One of the other, okay. So again, this is just illustrate that type of policy, how it works, right? So you're essentially leveraging, right, the $100,000 for an additional $400,000 of coverage, right? So the insurance company's taking on $400,000 worth of risk, and you're taking on $100,000 worth of risk in this example, right? All right. So back on this slide, just a quick comment on this bottom bullet. Another sort of distinction between policies that is sort of their form of paying out the benefits. Some are, most I'll probably say, are reimbursement, right? So you receive the care, you submit to the insurance company, hey, the care cost me this month $5,000, and if your benefit amount is above $5,000, then they're going to reimburse you for that amount. There are others that are called indemnity plans, where the insurance company just says, hey, as soon as we know that you qualify for benefits, right? You've got the plan of care from the doctor and you qualify, they're just going to pay you your benefit amount, right, that you qualify for, right? It's not through a reimbursement. Okay, I know we had at least one question around annuity kind of based linked benefit. So just sort of think of it as an annuity, right, with a long-term care insurance component or rider sort of attached to the annuity, right? So most instances, you're kind of funding the annuity through, after-tax dollars, right? And then it's sort of a traditional annuity product that says, hey, I could turn this into, a stream of income in the future, right? Or, it may have a death benefit that say, hey, if I never turned that income stream on, it'll pay a death benefit. But just sort of tacked on top of that, it essentially is, there's now some additional leverage that, hey, if I qualify for long-term care, not only will it have that sort of base benefit of the monthly income out of the annuity, there's some additional leverage added to it, right? And with all of these policies, something to keep in mind is, if you're married, same-sex marriages, all legal marriage, all that qualifies. A lot of times you can get some additional leverage, right? By having a spouse, and it'll be additional kind of leverage if you're both getting coverage. But even if only one of you is getting coverage, most policies will provide some additional kind of leverage, because going back to that earlier point, the insurance companies recognize that, if someone needs care and there's a spouse in the house, that spouse is going to actually defray some of that cost to the insurance company, is what oftentimes happens. And that's kind of to Alp's point he made earlier, where we recommend, hey, if somebody in the household needs care and qualifies for care, don't wait, don't delay turning on the benefits. Right? You paid for that policy, turn it on and get the benefit out of it. Right. And again, sort of like the previous example, there is some retention of your asset, right? Like versus the annual pay kind of traditional policy. All right, then there are what I'll say something that's primarily a life insurance policy that then has you can have like an accelerated benefit, right? That basically turns that life insurance policy into sort of a stream of income to cover long-term care expenses, right? Same kind of qualifying factors that we've been talking about. And some of you may have a life insurance policy that's already in force that might have this benefit available to you. Many of them probably don't, if you didn't intentionally kind of put that in place initially.
These are cash value policies.
Great point. Term policies. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this isn't going to exist in a term policy scenario. It's just going to be some form of a cash value. Variable life. Whole life. That sort of component. This I'll comment and I know we had some questions, right? Like, well, what if I no longer qualify for a long-term care insurance policy, right? Like Alp talked about the underwriting component, right? And so let's talk a little bit about the underwriting piece of it, right? So there's what they often call like their knockout questions, right? Where like sort of right up front, you need to be able to say like, I don't need assistance already, right? With things that like the activities of daily living, right? Those are sort of knockout questions for qualifying. Or, most cancers, for example, you need to be cancer-free for at least 6 months, right? Knockout questions, obviously, if there's already kind of in your diagnosis of Alzheimer's, dementia, right? Like those sorts of things.
Osteoporosis, right?
Osteoporosis, severe arthritis, right? Those things, if you have some, there's sort of a threshold, right? And so it's really important to do pre-underwriting, right? And get, that's something we do all the time, is get those questions answered up front. Let's go shop it around to see, hey, because not all carriers look at somebody's sort of health situation the same, but there are some that just knocks you out completely. I bring it up in this context, so if that is the case, that you're knocked out completely from a long-term care insurance policy, any of the prior 3 examples we talked about, the sort of loan example that might exist is a life insurance policy, right? So if maybe what ails you prevents you from getting long-term care insurance, but maybe it doesn't necessarily have a life expectancy component, right? You're expected to live a quote-unquote normal life expectancy. Okay, well, they might issue you still a life insurance policy with an accelerated benefit life. So that's typically going to be like the last remaining option for you if you.
And Jason, one of our questions is, and I'll just kind of alter it a little bit, but what is too old in a sense for shopping for a policy?
it's not a hard and fast rule. I will say most people get policies or kind of get serious about a policy between the ages of 55 and 65. You narrow that down even more, probably more in in your 60s, right, is when people are really getting serious about it, right? So sometimes it coincides with, hey, I'm getting close to retirement. The kids are off the family payroll, right? I don't really need my needs for disability insurance are gone. My needs for life insurance may be less, and now it's a question of long-term care insurance, right, and that potential risk. So how when it's too old, it all depends, right? Like, so if you could still be in your 70s, and if you're in good health, especially with one of the hybrid options, right? The underwriting for that is a little different. You might say, the insurance company might say, hey, yeah, if you're in good health and you're 70 something, you want to put in a 150,000 lump sum payment in, right? There may still be options there. It's that classic answer. It depends.
I want to throw out one thing that is always an interesting option. Is if somebody can budget, let's just say $500 a month, and they think that the cost will go up in the future, they can always tell their kids, Jason mentioned this earlier, hey, if the cost goes up a certain amount, can you guys help? Because the policy can benefit the kids dramatically.
Right? Yeah. I mean, if it provides me and my sister great peace of mind knowing that our parents have a policy in force that if they need care, we can help manage that care, right? We don't have to provide that care. We don't have to, try to figure out, okay, how is that care going to be paid for? Fortunately, my parents are able to afford the premium so far, but hey, if it ever got to a point where they couldn't afford it, oh, maybe you cost share it, right? And the kids, to Help's point, because it's collectively, it's kind of a benefit for everybody. It helps.
Instead of dropping the policies, right?
Instead of dropping the policy. Absolutely. All right. So I know we had questions around the cost of policies, and I hesitate even putting these on the screen because so much of it depends, right, on where you live, how old you are, your health status, if you're married and getting a policy jointly, right? There's so many variables that go into it, right? The level of policy that you're getting. But here's just to kind of give you a ballpark sort of idea. If you were paying a monthly premium, right, and sort of a traditional standard pay, kind of here in the DC area, this would be for a couple, right, where there's $5,000 of monthly benefit that actually could be shared, right? Like either person could tap into that benefit. 3-year benefits sort of at a standard health rate, right? So there are substandard rates, there are preferred health rates, but just wanted to, because I know a lot of people were asking, just kind of give you a ballpark general idea of, oh, okay, all right, this is sort of what the monthly premium could look like.
And one thing that stands out now is the policies are now gender specific. And so it costs a lot more for women, and we get asked why. And women tend to live a lot longer. And if they're married, they tend to help take care of their spouse in the early years. And so by the time they need the care, nobody to take care of them. So the insurance companies have figured all that out and have priced it accordingly now. So this, in the last 10 years, the cost for women has gone up substantially.
Yeah. And then I did comment earlier around sort of those single premium policies, kind of that cost. And I threw it out there, and it really is, right? You're typically going to look at least $50,000, right? And even then, that's usually kind of at the low end for a meaningful level of benefit, right? It's going to be more around the, I'll say more like at least 100,000 in a lot of instances, kind of as a lump sum payment. And there are people who actually mix it, right? They might say, you know what, I can afford 50,000 lump sum, and then I can afford, a few $1,000s a year for an annual premium, and have 2 policies, right? And they can coordinate with one another. So that does exist as well. I know we're running a couple minutes over, but we are very close to the end here. So appreciate y'all sticking with us. Some employers do offer some long-term care insurance options, right? Look through your benefit package. It can depend. It's usually sort of like a sort of just a simple level of benefit, right? Where somebody's younger, right? You might, and if it's very, if it's no cost to you, yeah, sign up for it, right? That's obvious. Sometimes I'll say both, whether it's through the federal government or through private employers, one thing to kind of be on the lookout and we do see this periodically at the federal government level. I don't think it's with any sort of regularity, but it just periodically pops up where they will have like limited underwriting windows, right? Where they're going to say, you know what, for a limited period of time, folks can apply for a policy, and you know what, they're going to be more lenient in terms of their underwriting, right? So if you do have some ongoing health issues that make it maybe to where you don't qualify, sort of going out and getting out on your own, or it's more expensive getting out on your own, be on the lookout for some of those. But again, I don't think they sort of, you can count on it. Oh, hey, once a year or every 5 years. In my experience, it's just sort of pops up. But that is something to keep an eye out. So I talked about this earlier, right? The underwriting is so important. So do a pre-qualification health questionnaire, right? So if you're thinking about a policy, that's something that, that we can send to you, or there are generic ones online as well. But just to one, kind of address those knockout questions that we've talked about. But then if there are some health items in your life currently, or if you have some things kind of on the horizon, well, then there's usually like sub questionnaires, right, that will dive a little bit deeper into that particular ailment, right? Like we see this a lot with the arthritis or osteoporosis, where they'll say, okay, all right, you have it, but like how severe is it, right? And they'll ask some questions, and what the medications are you taking, because that might not necessarily knock you out, right? And you can sort of do all this preliminarily before like going through a full application underwriting process. So definitely recommend that. I think we've talked about all these other components. All right. Right. So the self-insurance piece of it, right? So some of you might say, well, you know what, I'm comfortable with, my sources of income, my asset level, that if I needed care, right, if I needed to shell out a significant amount of money for me or my loved one, my spouse, right, that we could afford that, and it wouldn't impact our retirement, it wouldn't impact our kids, and our goals for leaving a legacy and that sort of thing. That certainly is in the realm of possibilities for some folks, right? But go into it eyes wide open, right? Like, have a plan for how you would pay for that, right? But that plan might also, as we talked about earlier, we see this more often now, where folks might say, I'm going to make some renovations to the house to where if I needed care, I can live all in one level, have easier access in and out of showers and baths and so forth. Or continuing care communities. I think like a writer would, as Al talked about with his parents, right? That can be an option where they say, we're selling our home. We're going to use a lump sum payment to sort of buy into a community care, continuing care community. And if we end up needing care, well, you can get it in that community, and they sort of eat away or spend down, right, the lump sum payment that you put into the community.
Yeah, so a lot of those continuing care communities, you're basically showing them your balance sheet going in, and if you have enough assets, they will allow you to do some gifting, but you can't give it all away. But basically, they'll guarantee that you'll always have a roof over your head, medical care, and food in your stomach. And so it's really interesting, and some people love that.
Yep. And they do some level of underwriting, right, Alp? They kind of ask you some
more
health
on the
questions.
Cognitive questions, I think, were the big ones that we saw.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Very good. I think we covered all of these components, right? So definitely recommend you, if you're going to work with somebody, if you're serious about it, work with somebody, right? A professional, an advisor, somebody who knows you, knows your needs, right? Rather than, because if you're just talking to somebody that you're talking to them about is insurance, you run the risk of somebody just sort of overselling you, right? Just saying, all right, you want long-term care insurance? Let's get you as much as we can possibly sell you. But all right, on that note, thank you for sticking with us. I apologize for running over. Like I said, I know we had a lot to cover. We may have opened up additional questions for you, so please follow up with us. I appreciate all the questions that were submitted ahead of time and during today. Here's our beautiful team. Feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to connect. Any parting words of wisdom, Al?
That's it. I'll just say we answered, I think, almost all the questions, and we'll reach out to those that came in, that we've got the contact information with the questions. So we will reach out to those that didn't get fully answered.
Awesome. All right. Take care, everyone. Be safe.
Take care. Bye.